work with your horse once it gets.
Yes. And I think this is really important because it is a progression. How does this become practical? How do you put this, like we talked about Addie and Addie's story and her, me just saying, do the target and, and it helped change your neural pathways, but where do you go from there? You know what I mean? And that is really important. And in the beginning, all you can really do is the bridge, before they get the bridge conditioning, the liberty leading, the target, some basics worked out. You want to be sure those basics are worked out. So we kind of have the 7 foundation pieces that we just think are exercises that we end up going back to over and over again. So like liberty leading really helps with that focus. So it's really an important component because they start learning to be more focused on us and matching our, our gaits or whatever. And so there's different things. And certainly like with the default position, we want that to have relaxation build up. So if it starts getting a little hectic, there's times we're doing the training, we're like, this is just getting out of control because they're not getting it. And sometimes we just need to go, let's reset for a minute so we can both. So there's purposes for all those things, but we want to move beyond those because those are things we're going to utilize to resolve issues pretty much later on as we go. And that's where, like even Minty, when he was in his late 20s, I still took energy up, energy down, did busy stuff, quiet stuff. You still practice those pieces. But so as you get those kind of fundamental pieces worked out, which is not the longest time, here's what we move into wherever it is we want to go. Because after that, it kind of opens up to a degree. If you're really struggling with, a trailer issue, you're going to probably start working on the trailer. Or if you're really working on, the lead change or whatever the thing is that maybe is kind of in the back of your head. But one of the things we do, we want the foundation to be strong. So they love the training. They're bought into the training. They've learned to be problem solvers. They're enjoying. So it means we've also changed their perspective a bit, at least like we show up and they're like, hey, what are we going to do today? We want that kind of excitement and enthusiasm with us so that we have a learner who is all in and wants to be doing stuff. So if you feel like your horse is not showing up happy to see you, well, then that's telling you something. But at this point, you probably haven't gone, yay, my human is here, and you've changed how they feel about it and they're excited about it. So as we go into whatever, sometimes it's just in general, we just want to introduce this because we understand how much it changes their neural pathways and creates a happier, better student and well-balanced learner. But sometimes it is a particular issue we might be working on. But we're careful not to go headlong right into that issue because we really can kind of poison the whole training. If every time, at first we show up and it's great and they're loving it, we're doing all the thing and they're like, this is, I love this. And then we start every time working on the trailer for 45 minutes. Pretty soon like, oh no, here she is. But this doesn't mean we don't deal with it a little bit, but what we might do is, we're doing our fun stuff and maybe we just approach the trailer, reinforce, go away, do other things for a little bit. So if you're going to deal, if your real desire is a struggle that you have in there, because I'm going to tell you, when we first started this, I got to work with Olympians and, the highest level of people in different disciplines. And this was what was interesting about it. It seemed like the highest level were all open. They're like, I'm going to the Olympics. I'd love to learn what you have to teach. They're very open. But who struggled? The middle of the road trainers. And I think that they kind of, because the Olympians they had reached it. They had nothing to prove to anybody. You know what I mean? I think they're quite confident because it takes somebody quite confident to truly and honestly and earnestly be open to learning something new. There's a person in there, and I think for some of the middle of the road trainers, this was a little new, and they're like, I'm trying to fit in. I can't go. So where I kind of got those people in the beginning was when they had trouble. They had struggled with something, and they would say, okay, well, lady, whatever crazy thing you have, I'll do. You know what I mean? I'd say, but you need to be part of the training. They're like, I'll do it, whatever. I've tried everything. I've gone from this to that. And I'd say, okay. So we would start and we would unpack it and it would change. So that my in was oftentimes their struggle spots. Their pain points was where they were going to come and be open to whatever we could do to resolve it because all the traditional stuff wasn't working. And so So I would get that, but I'd be like, but you can't just go right to the thing. We need to do this other pieces here, and you have to trust me. And I think one of the hardest things in the beginning is trusting the training. Because when you have done it a different way your entire life, and the whole industry has done it a different way, and you've learned it a different way, it's hard to trust that this way that you don't understand is actually going to be your solution. And so you're kind of having to teach yourself to think outside the box a little bit. And so I think that it takes a little bit of trust there. And once people started to have the success, then they trusted I can do more. You know what I mean? But I took that time and said, well, you give me 30 days and what I kind of thought, or 6 weeks, depending on what I thought. And even if we didn't get all the way to trailer loading, I thought I need to make enough progress that they can see that this is something different and start to see the difference in all those pieces. So I think that we can get to it, but we need to break it up and not go right towards the tough thing only, because it can just become, it's all aversive. And remembering that when they have those tough spots in there, they're saying it is aversive for them. That part has a history, and they're like, oh, dread, and so we need to respect that and go, okay, just a little, and then we'll back away and do something else so we can begin to open up that avenue. But let's say you have, you have a crossover horse, because that's what most people have, they have a horse that's traditionally trained, and you want to get started. What I think about is mixing in some fun stuff still because most people really want to go to an under saddle situation. That's where a lot of people really want to go. And frankly, we get that. We love that part. And I think there's a certain bond there when you get to under saddle that is bigger than just the ground, but you have to earn that place, that it can make it a growing thing. So what we recommend, what we do a lot, is we will say, okay, let's start and think about your horse and think, is there a place where there's a little tricky spot for him? Like maybe you think, well, bending to the right is a little hard, or lowering his head. Or I'll think about, like I talked about the off-track thoroughbreds. All I wanted was relaxation first, and then we're going to work on collection. But like Bugsy I had, and he was just stiff everywhere he was, and I had a little spook in him. And so what I did, I taught him that he's one that he was a quarter horse, but he was basically a thoroughbred. He was 3/4 thoroughbred, looked like a thoroughbred, acted like a thoroughbred, 16-3, Reedy. And he was a 4-year-old, and he'd been left out in the field, and somebody decided to make him a roping horse. I'm not sure what that was about, but it's somebody who, they had done a lot of the natural horsemanship stuff, started lots and lots and lots and lots of quarter horses successfully, turned them into cow horses, did all that. But Bugsy, while what worked for a lot of horses, it wasn't working for him. And he basically was rearing and getting bigger and bigger as they escalated pressure. It was like they were talking to him in a foreign language. So they go, oh, so about him. And then he's like, I don't know. And then they're like, he's like, I don't know. And then they're just getting bigger and bigger. It doesn't get clearer. It just gets scarier. And so he was the best. And then they decided they're going to make him a bucking horse. And then he wouldn't buck. When he would buck, if you weren't trying to make him buck, and then he wouldn't buck, and then they were sending him to the sale, and and this is the beginning of a slippery slope. And for some reason, my hunter jumper trainer, who's very staid, very successful out in California, she said, "I'll take him." So she took him for him, and she kind of had her rider restart him, and she wouldn't let her ladies who lunch even look at him, like buy him, but I came along and said, Minty's getting old. I could probably use a second horse, and so she said, I think I have a horse for you. I was like, wait, you won't let anybody else ride him, but you're going to chuck me out there. But anyway, so I got on him, and we were just talking. Like I was just sitting on him, about to try him. I was just talking to her about what we were going to do, and he spooked out from under me, and I was on the ground, and he's over at the fence quivering. And I went over and I said out loud, "Oh, I have the tools to help you." And I came back and said, "I'll just take him." And she said, "No, you must try him." I said, "Okay." But my mind is made up. So he had this baggage. He was an abused horse. For all intents and purposes, emotionally, traumatically, he had acute trauma. He really had chronic trauma in his their persistence of something he didn't understand, and nobody adjusted to realize he doesn't get this. He's not being stubborn. He's not even capable of that. He's not being belligerent, not even capable of that. That's not in the horse's, language. They don't have the developed prefrontal cortex. So I just started working with him, but one of the things he hung on to, he got better and better and better and better. But one of the things he did, I noticed he was very stiff and rigid in his neck. So what I started working on was softness and nice soft body bend, nice soft body bend, nice. And so I worked on those pieces to have them be his favorite behavior under saddle. So I worked in the best case scenario. So it was basically like his target. Remember how we talked about the target could create so much comfort? And I had no idea that this was going on, neurologically. And so I created those behaviors to be his favorite behavior. So when I'd be warming up and the reins are loopy, he would start, when he was ready, he would start his bending. And I knew he was ready to go. So then when we were out on the trail, if he got startled at something, he didn't like paint horses, and I think it was because of the cows. So if he saw a paint horse out on the trail, he struggled. And so if he'd start going, and I'd be like, okay, Bugsy, can you bend? And he'd be like, thank you. And and you could tell he was relieved. He let it go. He felt connected. He let it go, and I'd reinforce him. And then I could bend him the other way, and now he's back in the game. So working on something like that, and I knew this would help make him a better horse mechanically, but it also became a tool that I could use when situations perhaps got tough out there, and I didn't necessarily have a target. I could have a way to go, hey, I got the equivalent of a target here. Let's go to your favorite behavior. For Minty, that favorite behavior was collection. So because he was kind of a strung out thoroughbred, so when he was coming along, I never taught a horse collection. I'd ridden collected horses, but they already knew it. I didn't ever teach it. So with Minty, it was the first time I taught the behavior, but I got it to be his favorite behavior. And when I was riding, I was down in Wellington, and we had just done demos with Minty and George for the stadium jumping, and I was riding with the Olympic rider who was about to go to Sydney, and I was working with her and her horse, and horses, but one was her Olympic horse. And so we are now at the showgrounds just riding around, just talking. And Minty, what he would do when he was ready to go, he would collect. You know what I mean? Like, so my reins are swinging, and he's like, I'm warmed up. So he starts bringing his hind end under, raising up, and my reins are still swinging. And in behavior, like in positive reinforcement, like with marine mammals that's poor training. If they're offering something you didn't ask for. And so he's offering this, and she said, he's collected and on the bit. You're not touching him. And I said, I know, he does that. I thought, she's calling me out for this, going, sloppy trainer. And what I realized she was saying was, he is properly collected and on the bit with self-carriage, and you're not touching him. And and what was a big compliment, she said, I sure would like to ride that horse. My thoroughbred that I brought along, that was like, but so finding something, but I knew he needed the collection to help him to use himself better. So finding things that may be a thing that's going to help your horse to develop in a certain way, or if you're a green horse, you're working through lots and lots and lots of pieces that are going to come up. So I would just start working on the little basic foundations of it. And the beauty of having the clicker is you now have a way to say, let's say you're working on a piece and you just get that little hip over a little bit, and you're like, that's the piece, and it doesn't have to be the whole big piece, but you pull it out to one criteria at a time. So if we're working on 1,000 criteria at one time, we're making it muddy as all get out. But if we say, okay, for this mechanically to happen, the first thing we need to do is get that, the hind end to step over a half step. So isolate that. Say, let's get that hind end over, hind end. And when that's going good, when you cue, then you add on the next piece. And now maybe it's whatever it might be. So you work on the one, get that worked out, work on the next one. And it doesn't mean you sit there and drill it. Drilling it is never a good plan. It doesn't keep enthusiasm high. It doesn't keep a good attitude. It doesn't keep them paying attention either, because sometimes they're like, I don't have to pay attention. I know what we're doing for the next 30 minutes, and now they're not truly paying attention and on their toes. And also another thing, it's been shown that an intermittent or variable schedule of reinforcement is more reinforcing than the consistent, predictable one. So I want to put a little caveat in there. If you have a horse who's been in a traumatic situation, and again, it wasn't set out to be abuse, but there's a lot of training that ultimately is abusive to the horse's psyche. And so if your horse has been in that situation and they're just hypervigilant and lit up and skeptical and thinking everything's strange or danger, then a pattern and predictability is going to help them through that period, because they need to know what to expect, when it's going to happen. So we do use that predictable pattern at first. But then as they get more confident and we start opening them up to feeling safer, then we begin to enter variability into there, because this is what builds resilience. This is what helps them realize they don't have to depend on a pattern, but they start to look at everything a little bit more objectively. So utilizing some variety and mixing it up in there when your horse is ready. If you're starting with somebody green, that's green and that's great. But if you're starting with somebody who's had a history that they're showing you, I don't care what we think it is, look at your horse. Is your horse, on alert and worried all the time? Well, for whatever reason, they, in the words of my friend Dr. Sue McDonald, have probably suffered some acute trauma or chronic trauma. And so it leaves a lasting impact on the neurologic system, and it changes the brain. It changes who they are. So we want to readdress those pieces. So not drilling anything, trying to mix it up and moving on to other things and then coming back to it. So that may be, sometimes we'll start a session and our big focus is Bubba, and so we work on Bubba, but then we go work on a few other things. We're not just drilling on the one thing. And that I think keeps, especially for a young horse, who keeps it a little bit more fun and playful, and where they're like, ooh, what's next? And we want them to learn to be good at cue discrimination. And if we just get in this pattern, the cue becomes not as important as this rote pattern. So we want them to think, I got the cue. And that's part of playing the game, is them being on their toes and thinking, what's next? What are we going to do? And, and so we do something, then we'll run over here and do something else. And so I would think of the things that you naturally need to work on. And we'll be working on 4 or 5 behaviors, 6 are open behaviors that we're still working on. So it doesn't mean we have to just do one until it's perfect. Yeah, we might go this a little bit. Now we're going to go over here and work on your trot transition, or we're going to go over here and work on. And so we just mix it up and be working on different things and moving along. And then, so that is what
was an 18-minute answer.
Yeah, well, you're welcome.
It's 30 minutes quicker than
A qualified
question. If you're in the saddle and you're working on, say, just a leg yoke, and your horse does a great job and you want to reinforce, do you click and feed from? Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. And this is, and at first I'd still break it down to the little pieces. Like you might just feel that little bend at like the smallest thing. You go, yep, I like what you're thinking. And if we can have early bridges, meaning we bridge on the moment they think of it, we click when they begin the action, we can say, I like what you're thinking, which draws attention to what they're doing. If we want to get them to trot, and we wait till they've been trotting a bit, by now they may be thinking about the blue cone and so, but if we get the moment they lift it up in the beginning anyway, we can say, yes, I like what you're thinking there. And so we can let them know that thought is what we like. So we click the moment happens, but we very quickly then are starting to build duration. So then people think I must click at that point because I clicked at that point, but I want to do more. Pretty soon you're not going to click at that point. You're going to add another step. And you're going to click at that point, and then you're going to add a few steps, and you click at that point. Now you're going to get the hind end, whatever, and you build it up. But here's a little caveat. As you're building up duration, what you also want to do is go back and take early bridges sometimes too. So if it's always this migrating thing then pretty soon they're like, this is the example I like to use. If we have dolphins doing, they know to continue to do bows until they hear the whistle. Well,
it's a jump.
It's a bow. And so if we always blew the whistle on the 5th bow, pretty soon the takeoff or the first bow, meh. Because they realize this one doesn't really matter. Only the 5th one matters. But if sometimes we take the takeoff, sometimes the 5th one, sometimes the 8th one, sometimes the 3rd one, sometimes it keeps their kind of attitude and playing the game very strong and active. And that's really important for keeping, that's variety, because we're not doing the same old thing, but it is also saying, saying, I like your attitude, I like your enthusiasm, and it keeps it going there. Another way we add variety is sometimes in what we have in our bucket. Maybe primarily hay pellets and maybe some light feed in there, but then we might have some chopped up carrots and maybe a couple treats in there. So now you have a little random variety that can be offered even through the session, which is going to help with that. And also be a little introduction to a little bit more variety without it being too much at first, for somebody.
Well, they change.
Yeah.
Sometimes, Cap used to love celery, and now he's like, no. I'm like, okay, so now we don't use celery.
Yes. And right, and it can go, and when Henley came, Henley was a baby who came from Jesse's, comes to me in New Mexico as a yearling. And so she is a little, and she comes to this whole new place. She's just left her herd for the first time, came all the way across the country. And when she first got there, what she was eating is senior, because the Triple Crown Senior has a nutritional value as the young food. So it's a great way, something you can feed everybody. So she would eat senior as a, hard feed for her to, get her supplements or whatever. And then she would eat Mrs. Pastures. And that was it. So if you introduce her to hay pellets, she's like, I don't think so. I am the princess in the pea, and you gave me peas. So I would then started with mostly senior and this much hay pellets mixed in. And then pretty soon, and then a couple other little treats besides Mrs. Pasture, and you kind of start changing the ratio. And once they get more involved in the training, they're less interested in precisely what it is you're feeding. But, in the beginning, I had to go, this is what the little girl eats. And I need to, because I want to do quantities of this, I want to have more hay pellets be okay. So you can adjust that, and it will adjust for them as well. That it doesn't need to be maybe the extra enticing thing. Sometimes in new situations like being here with a horse it's not normally here, you might need a little extra to help them, or so whatever it is, but adjusting to and recognizing that behavior or reinforcer values do change, so we just need to be on the ball, and we don't assume the reinforcing value of anything, whether it is pressure and release or it is the appetitive or an aversive, so we want to just always recognize that it will, and you're going to grow through the process. So I'd pick the things that maybe, I'm thinking of you having a younger horse, you might be working on foot handling, then you might be working on under saddle stuff, and so you can have a whole gamut of things. But for a lot of crossover horses, they come in and they have a strong history with all the pieces, and they can do all the pieces. So then sometimes people say, do I have to train it all over? By the way, you always have fun shoes on. Little Murphy Meisenheimer. But there may be certain things. They have a reinforcement history of all of it. And some of it is rote and maybe not enjoyed as much, but they do it, and they do it up to snuff because they, it would be worse if they didn't, so they choose to do it. And some things are truly just like, yeah, okay, I got it. So if you get a new horse, a crossover horse, and you go to put the halter on and it's no problem, I would just feed that sometimes and move on. So now you're establishing a new, stronger reinforcement history. So while they may tolerate it and say, who cares, big deal, I don't really care, we want them to actually like it. So I would strengthen the reinforcement history, give them more food for doing the right thing, but you don't have to retrain it. They're already doing it. But if you come across something, like let's say you go to put the halter on and you do get a problem, and now either they're not coming to you, which is a big problem. Once you start positive reinforcement, that goes away. But let's say you can't get it over their ears, or whatever. They're having a struggle with those pieces, then I would say, okay, this piece actually needs to be addressed. So now let's unpack this, come in the side door, retrain it if we need to, because now we found, what we refer to kind of as a hot spot, an area that maybe does have triggers and is uncomfortable for them for whatever reason. And so try to get to the bottom of what that is or might be. So you're going to find some under saddle, you'll find some, and always pain is the first thing we rule out, always, forever. But it could be that, like you said, there's a long-standing memory of something. So as a crossover horse, we just look for those spots that seem a little bit tense. Sometimes just reinforcing them it'll soften and be easier. But for some of them, I kind of feel like, no, I think this is, you're gritting your teeth through it, and then we want to break it down. And that doesn't, and the reason is, okay, we can get them to do it. There's a time I was working with some people, and they had, they were trying to get some horses. They had 6 horses, rescue horses, trying to get them from Colorado to Northern California. So they're doing the clicker and the target, and they call and say, we're still struggling with them on the trailer. So I do a phone consultation, give them advice, and they go and do it, and they call back and say, no, I want you to come here. So it's okay. So they fly me there, and I watch them do what they're doing, and I say, okay, so they're using target, they're using clicker, but they're using halters. And they recently had gotten out of the rope halters, so they were using even rope halters. And so I said, okay. And so they had moved to the the softer, leather halters. And so then but they're still using them. And I said, okay, well, let's do them all individually without a halter and lead rope. We can just do them at Liberty they had an arena here. And so 2 of them, they said, were their best ones, were good, no problems. 4 of them were problems. Well, guess what? When you took the halter and lead rope off, who were the 2 worst ones?
The best.
The best ones are now the worst ones. Because once they're given a choice, they're like, I don't like this. I've never liked this. I've never wanted to do this. And lo and behold, who would have known? Because it was masked by the fact that they felt like they didn't have a choice in it. So now that can seem scary, and people can be like, oh, I don't want to know that. But you do. Because now those horses were going to go on a journey across the country. One of those horses was 29 years old, had a very long back, no core strength. I rode in the back with them on just a trailer training ride. I was like, he quivers the whole time. He cannot go more than a few hours. He will need to rest. It's not like you're just going to pack him up and drive for 12 hours or, and so I said, this is going to take a week, to get across country. And those 2, they're going to break down somewhere along the way because the behavior actually isn't solid. They don't really like it. And at some point, the flooding is going to overwhelm. And who wants to create ulcers and stress and oxidative, and things that are going to be hard for your horses mentally and physically. So we just, but the good news is we have tools to change this. Now, with them off of a halter and lead rope, you can figure out, is it the ramp you don't like? Is it the closing of the dividers? Is it and now we could figure out what piece is your struggle, and we could address that directly, which was quite helpful because, again, that's all information. If you hide that information, you never know that information. But if you get that information, you now have a way to recognize how they feel and what they're trying to tell you. Because you know what? The horses are communicating all the time. All the time. One time we watched like Hadley and the other horses were all in the paddock, and Hadley's kind of the herd, and it can be like it'll be 9 horses, next month all in there together. And there's a point where Hadley just did this with her little lip, and you can see the horses kind of back away. Like, not like she's not out there and she doesn't kick them, but she said to them, I need a moment for whatever reason, and they respected that. It was this. It wasn't a raising the leg. It wasn't an arching of the back. It wasn't an ears pinned. It was none of that. But you could see all of them read that and responded to it. That kind of communication is going on all the time. But with traditional training, we're not taught to notice when their lip is square, when their chin is pointy, when their head raised an inch, when they're, all of the eyes got a little tented. We're not taught necessarily to look at that, but that is their loud and clear communication amongst themselves. So if we can stop and go, okay, you're uncomfortable here. Now, are there times that you go, okay, I see that, but what if we, it doesn't mean everything stops because you saw the change, but being aware of the change and being able to put together, is this going in the wrong direction or the right direction? It is phenomenal for building trust, because then your horse realizes, I can communicate to you that something's a problem or something I'm struggling with. And I think this is a big key. When your horse is doing something that we don't desire, or that we're thinking, I'm making it clear and you're being stubborn, because again, they're not capable of being stubborn. But to look at it and say, you're struggling with something. How can I help you? So that's up to us. They didn't ask to be here. We've chosen this for them. So we want to stop and go, okay, how can we help you thrive? Not do what I want, not serve my purpose, but how can we help you to emotionally thrive? And so when we can read that little stuff and they can hear that, it's a way that we can begin this communication where they feel like they're safe enough to express themselves, and we're going to listen, and we're going to readapt and come up with a different plan, because there's a way through it. There is a way through anything. It's just kind of being creative and reaching out, and kind of like Christine was saying yesterday, reaching your community, you know, that can help you sometimes when you're going, I don't know what this is, and how can we do this?
When you've had a horse that's had trauma and past experiences that do change their neural pathways, what are the steps to helping them come back from it?
The not jamming them into it, for one thing. You're leading me somewhere. Yeah. What was? So basically, if we know that,
is it possible? First
it
of all,
is absolutely possible. In fact, it is, and your horse is going to be sounder longer. They're going to be happier longer. They're going to be less dangerous. They're going to get themselves in less trouble if they go to the vet clinic. And they're going to be less angsty in their herd if they get to be with herds. And it is, the basic part is you still start with the foundation, and you get them involved in the game, and you get them realize that they're being heard. Because if they're not being heard, they're going to continue to feel like I'm just being run roughshod over. So we kind of go, okay, I see this is a struggle, but we give them a lot of agency. We take the equipment off and say, can you do this? Will you do this? And you'll start to see them blossom, because of that seeking system we talked about yesterday, and how it is so very important for their survival. It's in there as a hard-driven part of their mechanics. It is a baby horse, the moment they're born, start figuring out the operant conditioning to get to nursing. And that is the seeking system. And that is alive and well. But it is an important part of them that needs to be activated and utilized. And that entails choice. That entails giving them agency over their lives. It entails, if you think about it, way back when I started doing positive reinforcement, in the magazines, nothing said anything about behavior. All the magazines said how to make them basically do a flying lead change, how to, this footing, this blankets, these boots, this fly spray, this, nothing talked about how your horse feels. And now you see a huge change where people are starting to say behavior, how do they feel? How can you help them do it? How can we help avoid ulcers? Are a huge byproduct of traditional training. Huge. And we didn't even really recognize it fully till more recently. But positive reinforcement and giving them choice and all the things that they need in their neurologic systems and their emotional states can help them, and to have them feeling heard gives them a way that they can communicate. So really starting with those foundation pieces and giving them choice and letting them realize that they can do it or not do it. So a lot of times with a really horse who's been through a lot, first thing I'm going to do is not go right to their old triggers. You know, we're going to go and say, okay, this seems silly, but we're going to teach you're going to teach you to spin, you know, just to walk in a circle. We're going to teach you to go to the target, keep your head away. And it's things that seem mundane and not connected, but it is addressing that emotional state and those neurobiology or that neurologic states, because those horses are in a state of fight or flight all the time. Their neurologic systems at this point are conditioned to be up there looking for stranger danger. I know I was abused as a child. I still to this day have hypervigilance. I just take in all the little things, and there are the trees, and there somebody goes. And it's just sensory overload all the time, because it happened when I was so young and I had no voice. So it became how I keep myself safe. I'm working hard to try. I realized just in the past couple of years, I have real anxiety. And I didn't know that because it was so normal that I didn't even recognize it. And finally one day I was like, this isn't depression. This is immobilized, like, anxiety, you know. But so I know that place of being my neurologic system resided up here, and that's my normal. And so to realize, how do I get it back to a settled place, it takes some work for me to get through. So when we have horses like that, what we're trying to do is help them feel safe. And that's the bottom line, is helping them feel safe and feel heard, so that we can help them not be in this state of fight or flight. Because you know what? State of fight or flight is certainly not a good place for learning. It's not a place they want to reside. But you know what? It's not safe. It's not safe for us, and it's not safe for them, because now you have that horse who's not showing you and not showing you and not showing you. Keep it together, and then they bolt out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere.
Yes, and it is not out of nowhere. We've taught them to mask or hide their precursors, instead of going, I'm worried about that tree, because they might have gotten corrected for worrying about that tree or gotten tension. They don't tell you about the tree, but inside they're trigger stacking, and their adrenaline's piling up. I want them to go, that tree. And I said, okay, I see that tree. Let's help deal with that tree, and we can do it in a way that keeps them low and can build their confidence and not just cramming them into the fearful situation. So it takes a process of really building trust between you and the horse. And I cannot state this hard enough. We are trying to help you also to trust your horse and trust the training, because there's some people you can see they're worried about their horse because now their horse is too reactive and it's been labeled for all these things that are actually inaccurate, but it can trigger us, which triggers them, which triggers us. So when people are, fearful, you're like, well, slow down. We're not saying just get back on the horse. We need you to feel comfortable with those pieces, because your horse is going to tell that you're on there going, don't look at the tree, whatever it is. And they're like, what's wrong with my human? So we want to truly think about their neurologic state, their emotional state, get them back to a place. We get them back to that place. We have a horse who's far safer. And this is what we're saying about when a horse is worried and they're not on equipment, they'll simply walk away. Well, that can be misinterpreted as they're not engaged, but mostly it's them saying, this is too much and I'm having a struggle with it. So, but if they were on halter or lead rope, it may be pulling and yanking and fighting or dangerous for us. I mean, yesterday we had some horses that if we let them go, they probably would have been too much and got themselves more revved up. They didn't have enough balance yet to be able to recuperate from that. But as we go forward, like Santino at the shows, he got a little up, but then he could get down and he kept it together. And that made him way safer than if we just would have taken him cold turkey out there with a really triggered up neurologic system. Did I answer that okay?
Uh-huh. I didn't get nearly the length as the last one, but
sometimes she's directing me at something specific, and I'm like, if I'm missing the specific part, you tell me. Other questions, you guys?
I've got one.
Yes.
What's your threshold for getting off a horse when you're riding and you recognize they start having issues? Because one thing we both struggle with a lot is just push a horse through it, just push the horse through it. And a lot of times we're like, maybe we should get off and address this or end the session. And a lot of times we've been like criticized for that. But it seems like
yes.
a lot
There'll
of your
be
training.
a lot of criticism.
Yeah, it seems like
We're used to it.
for some of your stuff, you
For you.
stay on, you do the training while you're in the saddle. But what would be like your threshold? Like, okay, I need to get off this horse and work from the ground.
And I think that is such a good question. And you know what we would look for? Okay, so let's say, you're walking by the tree and that just lights up a little bit. And we go, okay, something has got you worried. Can we direct pass and go like maybe towards the center of the ring, away from the edges? Do they come down a little bit? Mm-hmm. So if I feel like they go, okay, I'm a little bit better, then I might just stay in that area and reinforce the relaxation high, the softening, the quieting, and build that piece up. But if I go to the center and they're still there, I can't find a relief in there, I take it off and readdress it. Because now what you're doing is you're going to start getting like, what's happening? They're going to not feel supported. It's clearly saying, I'm not comfortable. And we don't want to push them through it. One time I was on the plane and some young gal had a service dog. She's like 20. Her dog's like 9 months. It's not a service dog, but she put on the vest and so I'm catty corner on the aisle and we're taking off and the dog is panicky and she's ignoring the dog. I don't like to offer, advice when I'm not asked, but I'm like, your dog needs you. And I said, comfort your dog. Your dog is trainer. And she said, oh, my trainer said not to because you could be reinforcing that. And I was like, no, your dog needs you now. He's really scared and now he's feeling very alone. And that's why I think it's the same kind of thing. People like, just get through it. That's not help for your horse, because you know what it is? It's saying your horse is being bad. And your horse is not being bad. Your horse is struggling. And when we take those labels out of there and realize they're not capable of these emotions that we project upon them, then you start looking at it differently and realizing this is sheer panic. Good for you guys just to get off and do what you need to do and take it as mental notes. Jesse and I are constantly saying there's no mistakes. So you get out there and you do it and you go, well, this isn't going like I thought. It's not a mistake. It's a point for learning. You take it in and you go, okay, I did that. This is what I got. How can I adjust and do it differently? So recognizing what it is, maybe you learned I need to, who knew that dogs were struggle for this little horse or whatever.
Dogs are afraid of airplanes.
Yeah, so who knew that your horse didn't like flying. But but I think that that point of being there and helping them is going to build a much stronger bond. Remember, the cavalry said, do not yell at your horse, do not raise your voice at your horse, or you could be court-martialed. Well, that's going to go the same for correcting your horse. You know what I mean? Because that's the same. When you start correcting your horse or getting tight on your horse, you're essentially yelling at them, and trying to say, I'm not listening to you. And their fear is their reality. 100%, they believe it. They feel in their hearts that they are in an unsafe situation. So when we say no, just keep doing it, we're dismissing what they're telling us. And now we also risk driving them into that learned helplessness. I told my mom at 4 years old, and she didn't know what to do with it. So I'm not penalizing her or saying anything. I loved her. But I think that I used my voice, and my voice wasn't heard. And our horses are trying to use their voice a lot, and we oftentimes aren't listening to what they're telling us. So pretty soon they stop communicating, and we can get them to shut down and begin flooding and all the things. So I love that you guys get on, and if you feel like you can't get that relaxation to come back even a little bit, I would adjust till I can see if I can find it. And if I can't, I would say, okay, I'm going to get off, and maybe we're going to deal with it from the ground. Another thing we do that can help is we do ride with targets sometimes in the early stages. Jesse hates it, but because Jesse's like, I want to be just
She
normal.
rides with a target.
Yeah, yes. and it's backwards, so I can hold it like
it's a little one
stick, and
This
I can
big.
click it like a holding a stick, but there's a target on the end that I can extend. So like one time she was riding Henley in the baby stages, and so Henley was out, and Henley starts looking off to the side of the ring. So Jesse pulls the target out, and you got to do it first from the ground so they know that it's coming from their side.
Yeah.
So that's what. But she held it out and said, Henley, can you target? And Henley let go of the thing and targeted and let go of it and never went back to it. So it helped her to bring her from that kind of worried state to a calm state. And then she didn't need to keep using the target, but it was a way that she could help transition her back into the game and help remind her that she has her safe partner that has the secret handshake up there doing that. So that's
Which is a really nice thing to be able to do when you're on a horse that hasn't been ridden 5 times and you doesn't steer and doesn't know stopping or anything like that.
And so it was a way to redirect her to something and help. So there's different tools like that. And even when we started riding Henley, we put we teach them, like we have the traffic cones out there with the reverse round pen, and we could teach them to go to the targets and the cones from far away. So you could stand in a circle, go target, and they go over to that one until you click, then they come back. So they know to go pursue targets and cones. And then when I first got in the saddle with Henley, Jesse from the ground would point her to targets and cones. So as she's about to point her, I'd say touch, target, and then she'd go over to the cone because then the ground cue is given to support it. So now she starts realizing that touch of the legs is a cue to go forward, not escalating pressure. It's a cue to go to the cone. Where do we click? Not touching the cone, the walking towards the cone, because it's the walking we're trying to get. If we're trying to get stopping and slowing down, I'd probably use a little bit of rein and then click as we're slowing to hone in on the cone. Yes.
Okay, let's go to this scenario. I'm sitting on the horse.
Mm-hmm.
The horse is heading to the cone.
Uh-huh.
It's walking.
Uh-huh.
And I click and the horse stops.
Uh-huh. They're supposed to. So that is a good thing. If you click...
Repeat the question.
Oh, yeah. So I'll repeat the question. So Denise said, okay, you're walking. You have your horse walking to the cone. You cue. They walk to the cone. You click. They stop. But we want them to stop because we tend to use the bridge signal. This is how we did it with the marine mammals. And really, most everybody does. As a terminal bridge signal, meaning it terminates the behavior. It said, you did that well. Now check in with me for some sort of reward. So that is a good thing. And sometimes in the beginning when you click, you have to stop them because they're like, it just doesn't count under saddle, and you have to actually stop and feed them and get them the idea. And then pretty soon we want to know that when they hear the click, they stop and check in. But in that situation, I would stop and feed a couple times. And again, you're clicking the walking. So the click is the piece that they latch onto. It's a piece that tells them that just earned me a reward. So the stopping is an incidental.
What if they then start offering this behavior while you're doing the work?
The stopping?
So they will walk. Okay, I'll try to stop. And they start offering this behavior, so you don't get them to go forward.
And that's not.
Repeat the question so that.
Oh yeah. Okay. So So now, as you when if they stop offering stopping in the middle of this, or anticipating that I should be bridged or clicked, so I want to stop. So in that situation, what we do is I just cue them again. And if they don't go, we just kind of wait for a moment, then we cue them again. And when they kind of give it up and start walking on, like not just stubby walking on, but when they start going, okay, I'm walking on, we click again. So it can be a short little phase where they go through where they don't understand the pieces, but they get past it. So pretty soon, so it's always going to happen when they're moving smoothly, so when it feels swingy and big, so they start putting together, and I think sometimes for some horses, if they don't understand the clicker strong enough, they may not latch on to the thing they're doing at the time, or it may feel like it's different under saddle. So just ignore it and we just carry on and pretty soon it goes away.
If you ignore it and they go to frustration, what would you do then?
I would probably I'd say, let's go to the right. Let's go to the left. Let's go and direct them to a different cone. So if going forward wasn't working, and it might be that I put the cones a little bit closer together, but I would then steer them to the right or the left. So we're kind of redirecting to something that isn't necessarily going forward to the one that wasn't working. A lot of times if you steer to the right or left, it kind of takes them off track, or I might use a target in that situation and say, go out here and get them to go to the right and then walk towards that other cone and then, click somewhere in between, or go to that cone and keep walking by to the next cone. And I'd still click the walking, even though you got that incorrect response at one point. That's going to be part of them figuring out what to do. But if it feels like frustration, I would go back and I would get it a little more, I would mix it up between touching the cone and not touching the cone. So sometimes I'd click early, sometimes I'd click later. But I'd still keep the walking because the stopping is the part that they're anticipating. But you'll get through it. I've had horses also sometimes back up a little bit, like, wait, you're up there with the food. And you're like, yeah, well, that's not going to work for you. So I just keep clicking on the thing you want to see more of, which is going forward. And they'll get through it. Because really what he's saying is, I want to get reinforced. So you say, well, then I'm going to be consistent on what I want to reinforce. So then you just say, I'm just going to keep sticking to this. And they really do get through it, I promise you. So it is, and if it feels like the frustration point, then go back to here's another thing I might do is stop, click somewhere, reinforce, feed, then ask them to walk forward. When they respond to your leg and go forward again, I'd click again. Because I think in there what they're saying is the cue to go forward is maybe not salient enough because they're not responding to it. They should want to feel that cue and go, oh, I love that cue. It makes me feel good, and all the endorphins and dopamine. So maybe there's a little history coming forward that has a little bit of, not liking that cue. So I think I'd go back and I'd strengthen that cue at the basic level too. So those are my thoughts for now.
Would you do that with a person on the ground?
Yes, that's a great, and she just asked if she would do that with a person on the ground. That would be a great way to go. There was a point where Jesse was riding Santino. Santino was great he was still really young, hadn't had much, but he was great with go and great with stop, and it was all going great. Well, one day he wouldn't respond to slow and whoa. And she doesn't want to haul on his halter to make him stop. So she's like, I can't really get him to stop. So I stepped in on the reverse round pen and said, okay, you don't do anything for a minute. And I had him walk and then hoe, because he will do it with the ground person. And then she could click and reinforce. And then walk, and then hoe, she could click and reinforce. Trot, hoe, click and reinforce, and she's back out riding again. But we kind of reminded him this piece that was missing right there, or that he was not having clarity on, we could bring clarity to so that he could know what to do and remind him how to get there. This is why those building blocks are so important. These successive approximations that build that behavior, because when you have a point where it maybe isn't happening, we have a way to go back and go, okay, let me help remind you how we got here so we can rebuild it. And when we shift context, and in that day, it didn't feel like a shift in context, but maybe there are 14 squirrels in the yard that we didn't see, or whatever that has him thinking something is different. And we've shifted the context, and maybe he couldn't keep track of those parts, so he lost his salience in the cue. You had a question over here. Does that help, Denisa? Mm-hmm. Good. You had a question?
Yeah, it's kind of
RCP.
Oh, Vivian. Yes. How are you?
Good.
Like,
Sorry, I
welcome.
tried to sneak in here, so
Yes,
I know
yes.
it's a little bit later. So.
Yay. Meet
yes.
your family.
Yeah.
These four right here.
So that's where I try with a fan I say walk on,
Uh-huh.
because that's another way to, I'm thinking, so I have dog training in my mind, so I
Yes.
always have to separate out some things,
Yeah.
but that's what I'm thinking about, that I can say walk on,
Uh-huh.
that he starts walking on his own, so I can use it when I sit on him as another thing,
Yes.
with, as an additional way of telling him
Yes.
what I want.
And,
So would
exactly. And that's and sometimes those are more salient for others, but the whatever cue has worked, you can do. You know what I mean? So you might say walk on and the legs, and in the beginning we do all the cues we can, because we're like, we want as much clarity as we can, and then we'll refine that cue as we go on, typically. But yeah, and so that would be figuring out, is there any way I can help him to go forward? Do I need another person in here? Do I need to, whatever it might be that can help? And never be afraid to take a step back if you need to take a step back, because he wants to get reinforced. So to me, it's saying, I'm not having clarity enough to know what it is, or my troubled past is overriding my exciting future. You know what I mean? In this situation, I'm afraid of what that is. And as much as we talk about, it can be really hard and fearful for horses to be free thinkers, as we're trying to teach them to break out of your box and show me something. It can oftentimes be very fearful for the horse who's had a lot of corrections, because it just feels like, well, I just stay here and don't do anything until I'm told exactly what to do. So I don't know what to do, so I don't want to do anything. So it can be a little challenge to finally get that little guy to open up. And maybe while it's happening on the ground, under saddle may bring that back out a little bit, if it's been a history of that, perhaps. All conjecture, we don't really know what they're thinking.
And it's our history with it too.
Yes.
So my Mustang mare Cinder, is a crossover horse. And I struggled in the beginning, so I was like, oh my God, I have to reteach everything. And Shawna was like, no you don't. I was like, yay! So I just started reinforcing the things, right? But then all of a sudden, my perfect little loading mare was like, no thank you. And I was like, So I did it at Liberty, and she wouldn't go 25 feet near my trailer, right? So we did all the things. But I had to really work on me, because I knew she could do all these things. I found myself getting frustrated during some of the training sessions where I was like, oh my God, why are you? And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, dummy. Because she's super tuned into me, and she, especially because she's a crossover, I could feel her almost very afraid to make a mistake, to not have the right answer. When she doesn't have the right answer right away, she gets very frustrated, and it was almost like she was like waiting for that other shoe to drop, waiting for the pressure. Yeah, I'm just gonna wait because I don't want to make a mistake. But I had to let go of all that, and when I did that, it changed a lot of things. So you have to be very honest with yourself in R Plus.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and that it's harder for me with the crossover. Because I also had my gelding who was like, oh look, I can spin. Oh look, I can do this. And my husband would joke, right? He says, you can do more with your untouchable Mustang gelding that you're never going to ride than you can with the horse you ride all the time. I'm like, yes, thank you. I'm aware of that.
So you don't want dinner.
Yeah. So that's not what he didn't get. But anyway, but I mean, it's taking that pressure
G-rated,
off of her
please.
and off of me, and really figuring out how do on what I want her to do and let go of all that other stuff and blending in, like I started, because my goal for her is to be able to ride at Liberty. And I trail ride, and I'm never going to just have her out, you know, nothing on her head when I'm out on the trails, but I just started utilizing, like, okay, well, this is what I do when I'm in, you know, playing with her with the R+. So I just started using that as I was doing everything on the trail. And now I have her bitless, and I have her neck rope on her, and I use the neck rope 95% solo on the trails. Her reins just are there, and I can just use the neck rope and the little cues, but I had to let go of all that stuff inside of me. So it's going to go probably really slow in the beginning, but then it goes faster.
That's what you say, slow down, you'll go faster.
Yeah.
You slow down and build that foundation. But in the long run, you now have a problem, a horse who's problem solving and liking it, wanting to do it and thinking through it. New things come up and, you know, and then it goes faster. But you got to slow down and build that trust, that foundation, that thinking, that safety. And then it goes. There was, I was thinking, like when I first got Bugs, you know, I told him he's the one that was a troubly one. And I had Minty that I had started from all the pieces from John Abisi, and he was just a dream. And anybody could ride Minty. People that never had food, didn't have food on him, just did regular. And he was a dream for them because all of it was classically conditioned. He didn't think you owe me for it. He's like, oh, I love Karen Depart. I'm good at this. I love this. I'm good at And he was just light as a feather. And when I started riding Bugsy in my head, I started saying, this isn't like Minty. You're not like Minty. Minty doesn't do this. And I didn't even really know I was thinking it. Yeah. But there was a subconscious level of me, and I had to have a little talk to myself. You know, I had to stop and go, he's not Minty. And you enjoyed the process with Minty. Why are you trying to rush this place? Just, you know, and so I had to in my head say, let go of this comparison to Minty and just enjoy this. And so, like I did. Then I finally was like, okay, my bad. And then I'm telling you, he got to be like Minty pretty dang quick once I let go of you're not like Minty. You know, but it was me having to kind of check myself and my expectations and what it should be and think, just pay attention to who's in front of you and help him to be a better version of himself. And it's
keep having
true.
Fun with it. Like,
yes.
That's what I go back to all the time. If you're in a session and you're not having fun,
that's our golden rule.
Fix it.
Yeah.
Like, fix it. Because I am like a goofball in some of my sessions, right? Like, I have fun like I've never had with the horses. And it gets to the point where I swear they do what you think.
Yes.
It's a little, in a really lovely way, kind of creepy. I was practicing sending Cappy, working on distance, adding duration, sending him to cones, pulling him back. I was linking together some behaviors. And so I sent him to the cone, and we have the big exercise ball up there, and I thought, oh, I bet he goes to that ball. And as soon as I thought it, he was like, go to the ball. Oh my gosh. And I was like, how about we go to Target? And he was like, I'll go to the Target now. And I even left it in my training session video because I'm like, I thought it, and he did it. So I wasn't like, oh, we went to the ball. It was like, oh my God, we went to the ball. Because I thought it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you just have
they're on your body language and what you're thinking. And I think having fun is our number one rule. Number one, you and your horse should still be having fun. Because this is how you're going to get it. When they get all their food each and every day, they get all their social interactions, they get, you know, that was the marine mammal thing. But why are they going to do it? Because it's fun. It's environmental enrichment. You help them feel like they're successful. You know, and success begets success because pretty soon they feel more confident because they get the right answer. And that's that seeking system. You're honing that problem-solving skills to trust their own seeking system. When we've taken it away from them, by and large, we have, you know, said, I'll feed you, I'll do this, I'll do that, you know, I'll tell you everything you do. And so now we kind of have to teach them how to do that again. And it's very fun and it's awesome to see, but it should be fun. So if you feel like you're gripping too much, here is, I think, one of the struggles with positive reinforcement. It's science-based. So then people get sciencey about it and they can kind of get analysis paralysis because, you know, you're trying to think too much of what I'm supposed to do. But you know what I want you to remember? The horse gives you all the information. So as you step out there and go, hi, and none of them read the books. So you're going to get ones that break all the rules all the time. So, but really behavior happens for a reason. So when you stop and go, okay, this isn't out of the blue. There's a reason this is happening. And you just start looking and thinking, is this getting better? Is this getting worse? They'll continue to tell you what to do. You know who's really good? Little children. I remember there's a little 6-year-old girl I worked with down in Mexico City. And she had a big horse. She was a serious little gal though. And she was really good because you could give these little kids, I had like little kids in the afternoon and adults in the morning, and you would give them the concepts. They didn't know any of the language. They didn't know any of the words. You gave them the concepts and they could do it because they weren't in their head. I learned this in a clinic. I saw it in a textbook. They were just there going, this is working and this isn't. And they're really good. So I want you to kind of have the freshness of a little child when you're in there. Just think, okay, I'm going to play with my pony. There was a man that was a big-time body worker in Southern Pines, and there was a gal who came who was a big Buck Brannaman person, was doing a lot with him, and I was working with a lot of her clients because I had this series of clinics I was doing. I'd come in every 2 or 3 months, and so the one gal comes, the Buck Brannaman series. They said she'll be coming at lunchtime, and I thought, oh, these people hate me. But whatever. I don't care. I just do what I do. And she shows up, and you see her pressed Wranglers and her duster and just sew and put together, and and I thought, there she is. And so I go on. At lunchtime, she says, can I talk to you? And I thought, oh, go in the principal's office. That's what it felt like. Like, oh, I'm going to be lectured. And she said, you know what? I think this is the missing piece, the missing link. I was like, well, yeah. And so then she started doing the positive reinforcement. So she's doing it with her clients' horses, which were professionals that we were working with. And this body worker that was, very high level, charged lots, booked up months in advance, he would make fun of her and said, so you're feeding your ponies, and mock her. And she's like, yes, well, it's blah, blah, blah. Well, then one day he came to a demo I did there. And then the next day he showed up at every one of his clients' lessons, because the next day I had a bunch of lessons. He was at all of them. And so she goes back to him later and said, so, feeding your ponies? Because clearly he was on board now. And he said, you know what? I feel like I'm 12 years old again, and I'm playing with my horse, but I'm getting serious things done. And I think that is a key piece, is to remember, you can have fun. They can have fun. Everybody can enjoy it. Yeah, it doesn't mean you're compromising what you're working on or where you want to go with it. It doesn't mean you're all play and not moving towards, loftier goals. It means you're doing it in a way that is fun and engaging for both of you. And so I think that was probably one of the biggest compliments, we've ever had is that one, because it kind of surmised what we really want it to be.
But he felt that way because he watched the